Hi everyone, Walt Fritz from Foundations and Manual Therapy Seminars. Years ago I read a book called The Holographic Universe, which was an interesting kind of metaphysical journey into how, our perceptions, etc. And one chapter really stuck with me, and that was where they were looking at death and death experiences, where a person came back from the dead, in terms of being resuscitated, and etc. And then the authors or whoever it was I guess it was in the study, interviewed the people. The salient point there was fascinating, was how the person who experienced that death experience and then coming back, how they experienced what they saw, what they perceived. And it really was interesting to me how what they perceived, what they remember from that experience was based on their history, their lived experience, their social and often typically religious beliefs. The author goes into great detail in terms of what each religious group saw or social group saw, etc. The easy one for me to remember is Christians saw angels, whereas other religions witnessed and experienced totally different experiences, which was fascinating. And again, I read the book probably almost 3 decades ago, so a little bit of this is conjecture on my part. But the author was questioning, well, if death is death, are there really different corridors for people of different religions? And without getting into that sort of conversation, I thought that was an interesting concept, that our early beliefs are so ingrained that they become how we perceive everything, including the beyond. The reason I bring this up is, as we work, as we use manual therapy or exercise or behavioral cognitive approaches, I think so much of our beliefs on what's wrong and what's happening when we intervene are based on those early learning experiences. I know myself, it's still, after 15 years now of kind of moving on from explaining everything from a myofascialist perspective, I still think fascial tales. When someone says to me, well, what are you feeling? What do you think is wrong with me? Those are interesting questions for us to answer. Can we answer them in 100% surety, in being factual, or are we answering the question based on our early training, our early education, our early experiences, all of which frame how we perceive? When I touch somebody and I feel a thick, grumpy area, which is how I like to refer to it now, instead of calling it a trigger point, a knot, a fascial restriction, lymph pool, all those things that manual therapists and possibly exercise-based therapists might go to as well. But it's really difficult to tell a person what's going on there without driving back into our learned experiences earlier in our career, earlier in our life. I think it's a worthwhile one to explore. I don't know that I'll ever completely sponge this part of that fascial belief system from my brain, and maybe I don't need to. Maybe I just need to be aware of my biases and say, well, it could be something with your connective tissue, or it could be with the nervous system, or it could be a simple holding pattern that your body hasn't figured out a way to let go yet. But I think it's really interesting and educational for us to really examine our biases. That's it for today. Thanks for listening.